Okay, so last week we had done 12 to 14. So just having a short recap of those three verses. So in verse number 12 we have the last message from the teacher, because in the composition there is Guru Uvacha and Shishya Uvacha. So from 13 onwards the Shishya's word or the verses composed in the nature of the Shishya speech is being given out. So in Guru Ruvacha's last verse, it is said, he concludes his teaching with the following message. And what is that message? He who is free from fear of actions, obligatory or prohibitory, and ever remains the same in gain and loss, that ever enlightened one alone is indeed liberated even while living. There is no doubt about it. So when we were discussing Bhagavad Gita's chapter, I think in chapter 2, when we had some discussion regarding liberation post Videha Mukti, that means liberation after death, and Jivana Mukti, liberation in life. So Sw Tejomayanandaji's composition has clearly indicated the Jivana Mukti condition as the outcome which the teacher is indicating. And this is to be understood in that light, because Tejomayanandaji is trying to bring out only the essential points and not any other extended discussion. So in an extended discussion, one can discuss the idea of Videha Mukti and Jivan Mukti as two alternate ideas, which Krishna did in Bhagavad Gita. But when we are trying to understand the Sara, the essence only, the only thing that we need to focus on is to understand what is the liberation and why is it referred to as liberated while living. So we get a clarification based upon the other attributes that the teacher has concluded with. So one of the attributes that the teacher has concluded with is saying, he who is free from the fear on performing actions. So when we say fear of performing actions, normally the human mind will not be ready to accept this idea of fear of performing actions, because we tend to look at actions as that which is the product or that which has been prompted by desire. So straightforward, our mind can come to the idea that why should the mind be afraid at all of performing an action? But it doesn't take us too long to understand that actually this fear is not the fear of not performing action. This fear is related to the mind which is oscillating or vacillating, relating itself to the outcome of actions. That is what the teacher is trying to point out here. So the mind which is desire driven and action which appears to be the product of desire has always an outcome in mind, because if the action is not desire driven, then the outcome won't matter. But when it is desire driven, the only thing that matters is the outcome, because the desire itself says, I am working for this outcome. Now the fear that the teacher is saying is normally associated with actions, and the teacher mentions obligatory and prohibitory. And when we reflect on that and we say, if I can understand fear only if I relate to the fear. Now, it's quite common experience. We drive all over UK and you break a signal or you get into a bus lane, and somewhere you find indications saying there are cameras here. So you're always in mortal fear of saying, since I have done a prohibitory action, what is the outcome and what is likely to come in my post? So you're always awaiting something that is likely to happen. So that is a very simple example of prohibitory action. We know an action is prohibited. We have done the action, potentially by ignorance, but we are worried about the outcome of that prohibitory action. Similarly, for obligatory action, the idea of obligatory action also is a slightly tricky thing. We tend to think that actions which are imposed on me is obligatory, not necessary. Every action that is desire driven, apparently it is an obligation of our stage and station of life. That means if you say, I am studying to pass exams. So my station of life is that I'm a student and I have to get some qualifications. So in that station, you have made some obligatory actions. And we are constantly trying to battle the fears that are associated with those outcomes of actions. So what is it for a Jivan Mukta? What is it for the man who is liberated? So here we can understand that the teacher is not talking about some faraway liberation. He's talking about liberation in and while living, in life while living, engaging with everything that is likely to come across, both as obligatory and prohibitory. It doesn't matter. The mind will be free. So there is absolutely no vacillation in the mind or confusion in the mind related to outcomes. And why it is not there? It comes from the very essence for which we say as the drive to perform obligatory and prohibitory actions, which in the past, when there was no liberation, was entirely desire prompted. Post liberation, it is situation prompted, not desire prompted. As the situation arises, so the action can happen. So last time we had this discussion about, someone asked, what do we do in case of an appraisal? I'm not sure who raised the question. When you're supposed to appraise, I think Dakshaben mentioned this. If you're doing an appraisal of somebody who is a junior, how do you do it without desire? How do you do it without focus on outcomes, etc.? Many liberated teachers have clearly indicated that these are very simple actions which arise almost as if to say they are arising only as if they are situational actions, almost like reflex, requiring a reflex response. In all reflex responses, we don't have to even think twice. We just have to respond as per the reflex. Just like that, the world of engagement will present itself to a liberated person, and the liberated person can give the appropriate response based upon the need and the condition and the capacity that is endowed on the liberated one. So if the liberated one does not have the capacity to respond correctly, depending on knowledge, depending on status or position or whatever, the liberated one may or may not respond. And if the liberated one has been endowed with the knowledge and capacities, he will respond absolutely the way the situation demands. So that is the first one. The second one is again related with living and life, is what happens to the mind when it gets a gain and what happens to the mind when it gets a loss. So the standard condition is mind is in disturbance, it's in turbulence. But for the liberated one, it remains samatva, it remains at equanimity and completely equanimous both in gain and loss. So in this way, the teacher has explained to us why the applicability of jivana and the applicability of mukti in jivana is valid. Because the two conditions that he has placed before us are the two conditions when the mind is disturbed or in turbulence. And in those two conditions, standard conditions or standard situations, the mind of the liberated one remains completely balanced. And in addition, the teacher mentions the word ever enlightened, because this actually does come up as a question in the mind of a seeker, in the mind of a disciple, saying the state of oneness is a condition when you transcend the mind. And the state of living is the condition in which you function as the mind. Then what is the experience of the liberated one when functioning as the mind? The teacher explains and says, he is ever enlightened. What does that mean? That means that the characteristics of the mind is by design of turbulence. But for the one who has attained the state of liberation, Jivan Mukta, for such a one, the mind is of almost what one can say is perpetually in equilibrium. The only change in the mind is only to engage and to transact. Otherwise, it is in perpetual equilibrium. So this bit of why the teacher has to mention ever enlightened comes from this fact. And Swamiji gives one supporting verse to explain what is the state of the ever enlightened one by saying, the wise man, having destroyed his ignorance by the initiation of Guru, knows himself to be the seer, the witness of all. Even as he revels in the city, seeing various men, women dressed in beautiful clothes, ornaments, he never gets deluded. So effectively saying that the impressions and the perceptions arising by the mind, by the enlightened one functioning as the mind, appears to be the same. That means all sensations, all perceptions, everything appears to be the same. But the impact of these sensations and perceptions is not to create delusion, but just to arise and to pass away. Almost as if a ripple or something that passes away, and again there is calm when the pond waters, when you look at it from the perspective of the waters of the pond, the ripples will arise and after some time they will just settle down and will be calm. So that is the condition of this enlightened one, and that is the condition of this phrase which Swamiji has used as ever enlightened. And this whole bit of the Guru Ruvacha from Vedantic perspective has clearly shown us three different stages, and I'm trying to bring out these three different stages because every time we come into this condition of discussing what did the teacher tell us and what is it that we need to follow. So the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads that we have been so far covered have given us different techniques. But for the individual, what is actually happening? For the person who thinks that he is bound, for the person who thinks that he is living a life of misery or sorrow. So each and every one of us, we may not agree, but we are in various stages of acceptance that we are living the life of misery or living the life of sorrow. We might think that we get joy sometimes and we get sorrow sometimes, but we don't want to completely rule out the idea that we do get misery and sorrow. We understand that. So from Vedantic study and from Guru Ruvacha, what do we understand and gather as to what is it that the disciple is actually learning from the teacher and how does he actually implement it? The first thing is that my mind is colored by a lot of blemishes. I must work in trying to remove those blemishes. So we call those blemishes arising from the very nature of the mind, which is called inactivity or activity. So it is called tamas, which is lethargy and laziness or negative tendencies, and rajas, which is activity oriented but desire prompted. So these are called blemishes. We have to work towards removing these blemishes. So that is the work that we talk about in the method of using selfless dedicated action. So the first bit is that removal of blemishes. But then just because we have removed blemishes, are we in a position to get ever enlightened or be into the state of ever enlightened? No, there is still a gap. The first gap that arises is the mind is never single pointed. The mind is constantly flirting from one sensation, one condition, to one perception, to one thought, to another thought. So this flirtatious mind has to be prompted to become single pointed. So the flirtatious mind to become single pointed requires someone, the seeker, to pursue some method, and that method in some cases is referred to as upasana, bhakti, or prayers, and in some other cases it is referred to as japa. Bhagavad Gita does all of it. Bhagavad Gita explains upasana, explains japa, and also explains bhakti as that which is allowing the mind to become single pointed. The first is removal of blemishes, second is making the mind single pointed. The last bit, which is what the Guru has already explained, is the contact with the teacher or sitting in a cross-legged posture doing meditation. So how is the contact with the teacher the same as doing meditation? It is the same in principle and in theory and in actual life. It is the same. Why is it same? Because when we sit in cross-legged position and when we are attempting to do meditation, what you're trying to invoke is what is called as the teacher that arises in one's own inner being, which is a guide. So it is called Shuddha Antakarana. In Sanskrit it is called Shuddha Antakarana. The pure inner being of yours, the one that has been cleared of blemishes, the one that has got aligned because of single pointedness, that itself acts like a guru. So many teachers have clarified that whatever teachings we give you, whatever teachings you have received, some teachers might bless you by putting their hands on your head, some others might give you a massive hug like Amritanandamayi Amma of Kerala, or some other teacher might just give you Diksha by eyes, like how Sri Ramana Maharishi used to say. People used to say, I received my Diksha from Ramana Maharishi through just a glance from his eyes. So in whatever way they have done, ultimately that operates through your Shuddha Antakarana. It does not operate as if it is appearing from outside. It operates from Shuddha Antakarana. So the third stage is getting established in one's own true nature with the help of Guru's grace. This is the word Guru's grace has to be understood that it doesn't come from outside. It comes from within. The teacher might appear to exist outside, but it comes from within. So that is your last phase. So once we know these three phases are part of my sadhana, we will not be worried at any point of time what is operating. At some point something should operate. But this is what we call as the sketch that is available to every seeker, as to say, I'm operating, I'm functioning as per this roadmap. So once we know this from verse 12, which is the last message of the teacher, we now enter what is called as the Shishya Vacha. So in verse number 13 onwards, the Shishya is recalling or recounting what is the benefit he has gained from all these teachings he has received from the teacher. Mind you, this disciple has not received the teaching and he is not instantaneously responding. The disciple has been a great practitioner and has also been quite well advanced in his practice. So we can make that out when we read the verses. So disciple says, this very world which earlier appeared sorrow-ridden now appears blissful. I bow down to the Guru who has achieved this task for me, which was considered impossible. So this is what I was telling about. The glance of the Guru, the touch of the Guru, the message of the Guru, the teaching of the Guru actually embeds a seed into the mind of the student or the disciple or the seeker in such a way that the seed has to necessarily blossom. There cannot be an alternative but for it to blossom. So that comes out in the last line of the disciple, who says, without you, such a thing would not have been achieved. What is the thing that the student says he has achieved? He says that I have suddenly been rid of all my ignorance and all my sorrow. So what was the life of the earlier life, which appeared to be sorrow-ridden, now is completely blissful. So there appears to be no presence for sorrow. And all of this has not been possible but for your presence or but for your teachings. So this idea that the disciple recognizes the teacher's worthiness or the teacher's input or the teacher's grace is clearly shown in this particular verse. And last time when we were discussing this, I mentioned about great masters always carrying the portrait or the photograph, or you can say the statue or something of their master. And if you think that the earlier master would not have carried something of his master, that is also not true. Every teacher will carry the image or the picture or something of their masters. And suppose such pictures or such things were not in vogue, depending on the time and things like that, the disciple will at least have the name of his teacher on his lips, almost as if to say, acknowledging that the teacher has alone made this possible. There was a great saint in Maharashtra by the name Jnaneshwar. So in all of Jnaneshwar's compositions, he uses the word Nivritti Prasade Jnanadeva Bole. So what is the meaning of that line? He says, my teacher was Nivritti. So his elder brother was his teacher. So Jnanadev, who is composing this verse, is speaking. But he is speaking as the gift of Nivritti Maharaj. So in all his compositions. So even the most profound of Vedantic compositions that Jnanadev has written, Jnaneshwar has written, he will always end this statement by saying, Nivritti Prasade Jnanadeva Bole. So same logic applies for all the teachers. Every single teacher has paid obeisance to their guru. So when Raman Maharishi was asked, to whom do you pay obeisance to? He instantaneously, even in the early days when he used to speak very little, he made a composition addressed to his guru. And his guru was nothing but the hill Arunachala. So he humbly prostrates to the Arunachala in the composition that he has given out. And all of those lines that have been given out clearly give the message of what was the knowledge and what was the teaching he received from his so-called teacher, in a way in which the teacher has got embedded in his heart and has taught him from within. All the message, all the teaching, all the knowledge has been taught from within. And of course, all disciples of Ramana have made written compositions, etc. They have shown great gratitude and obeisance to their guru. That is, one of the examples is Murugunar, another great devotee of Ramana, who had given a huge composition addressed to his guru, which is Ramana, how he has removed his ignorance, in spite of the fact that the disciple has been incapable of being obedient. So even that has been mentioned. So some of us think, oh, we are far away, we don't have that level of commitment, we are very lackadaisical, so we have no future, etc. Even great seekers and great liberated teachers, Murugunar was considered a liberated master. Even he, when he composed like that. So we can easily understand that it is not the sentiment of any disciple to easily and openly acknowledge that the liberation has come in free or come in easy or nothing like that. The message will be that I have constantly and continuously made some seeking. The last verse that we discussed again of the verse number 14, which is again the disciples' words, in which he says, here Swamiji Tejomayanandaji has given the verse and he has given the commentary based on a Bhagavad Gita verse. So what is the key word in this? It is Ascharya, it is wonder. Now this word wonder is often used because of the manner in which it functions in the human mind. So here the disciple says, oh, what a wonder! By the vision of oneness of truth, the entire notion of differences has vanished completely. I do not see anything even a bit as different from me. Isn't this vision of truth most wonderful? So it begins with the Ascharya element or the surprise or the wonder element, and also ends with this Ascharya element. He calls it Maha Adbhuta. Adbhuta is again the question of wonder. And the Bhagavad Gita verse uses the word Ascharya 4 times throughout the verse, effectively saying that rare are few who realize the truth, see it as a wonder, they speak of it as a wonder, it is heard as a wonder, it is a wonder that some do not know it even when taught. So the Bhagavad Gita composer Krishna, who has given out the Bhagavad Gita, has used even the aspect of Ascharya for the seeker who is not functioning as if making an effort to gain the higher knowledge. Even for that, he uses the word Ascharya. For the truth itself, he has used the word Ascharya. Because when we look at the truth, we know that it completely creates what is called as a paradigm shift. We don't function anymore with the vocabulary and with the script that we have so far engaged with. So Gary Weber puts it in a very beautiful way. The entire operating system is removed from the hard disk. And I have physically known what happens to a computer if you remove the operating system. It is absolutely hopeless. You can do nothing with it. But what Gary Weber says is, the whole operating system, which is very bulky and uses a large amount of disk space, gets removed. So suddenly, the whole machine, which is so-called a machine, becomes very light and unburdened. And he says what then happens is there is another mini operating system, which is a very light system, which does not have complexities, which is simple and which is transactional. That gets installed, and once that gets installed, the entire paradigms that with which we had earlier been operating with the traditional operating system, the first paradigm that will be missing in the new one is the concept of me and the concept of mine. So both of which are wiped out. So it is like saying there will be some folders that you had always thought everything that you know, all your photographs, all your files, all your valuables are in 4 folders. वो 4 folder गायब. Those 4 folders are vanished forever. You say, if you remove those 4 folders, what else will remain? You say, no, a lot of things will remain. There will be one folder called today. So what do you do with today? Okay, you engage, open the folder. You will see a lot of things are happening. So you will engage with today. So that is how Gary Weber has brought us to that idea of the wonder and what is prior and what is post. So that was 12, 13 and 14. I think